Now, let's kick off with Reform UK, shall we? Because Reform are accusing the BBC of targeting its councillors since May's local election. Analysis by the party claims the broadcaster covered 95% of Reform councillors who lost the whip, compared to just 15% of Labour and Conservative councillors. It comes amid turmoil at the BBC, which we know about ad nauseum. We've covered it at length on this channel, after both the Director General and the head of BBC News quit after accusations of institutional bias in many, many areas. Well, Reform UK's head of policy, Yusuf, is in the studio with me. And as you know, on a Sunday afternoon, I'm grateful to have anyone in the studio because it's very lonely. They don't let me have friends. So, Zia, thank you so much for coming in and joining us today. Tell us a bit more about this research that you've done and how you've done it. How did you quantify this?
Well, look, it was a few weeks ago that me and Nigel did a press conference and we said, look, there appears to be an insane amount of scrutiny over what Reform are doing at local levels, unlike anything we've seen in our lifetimes. And now we actually have empirical proof of this, right? So this isn't just subjective or me or Nigel or Richard saying it. These are hard numbers. And what the analysis shows, and by the way, this is all just from open source data you can find online, the BBC seems to be absolutely obsessed with reporting negative news about Reform councils. So they are 6 times more likely to report when a Reform councillor loses the whip relative to Labour or Tories. And here's what's really interesting. That is despite 4 times as many Tory councillors having lost the whip and 5 times more from Labour having lost the whip since May the 1st. And by the way, this is empirical evidence since May the 1st. It follows a very long pattern of hostility, by the way, of the BBC against Nigel Farage. Some people might remember all the way back in 2013, all of the insane, overzealous scrutiny about Nigel's party. But then also...
They had to apologise twice officially, haven't they, to Nigel Farage?
At least. I mean, remember Krishnan and Guru Murthy during the general election campaign saying that Nigel was using his quote. I still remember watching this. He said his customary inflammatory language.
Yes.
Remember that? He was very pleased with himself.
The debanking scandal.
Yeah, and then they claimed, all of the lies that they told about him. And by the way, they had to apologise about those two things. And so one of the things the media can do in order to shape a narrative is to selectively report on things. And it is not like we are sitting, as we said at the time of the press conference, of course, Reform politicians should be scrutinised. Of course, Reform councillors should be scrutinised. But when 4 times as many Labour councillors, Tory councillors have lost the whip since May the 1st than Reform, and 5 times as many Labour ones have, you would not get that impression by following the BBC's news coverage. And one of the reasons this really matters is because the licence fee is obligatory to pay if you happen to have a television. So this is really, really serious, and we haven't had anything. I mean, the spokesperson for the BBC just basically hand-waved the whole thing away, which, of course, is exactly what they tried to do with the whole Trump affair. Of course. And it doesn't do them any favours. So
why do you think they're doing it?
Well, why do you think? I think it's because, sadly, the BBC newsroom, at least the newsroom, but there's obviously figures, we can talk about Gary Lineker and all sorts of figures before that, I think the newsroom is extremely hostile to Reform, is very concerned about Reform getting in. And what the BBC seem to have forgotten, is that they are not there to lecture the British public about what they should believe. They are there to report the news. And I'm sorry, that is why this methodology... I mean, the BBC spokesperson also said, oh, well, it's not clear what the methodology... Well, all of this is public data, so you can go and see it for yourself. Number 2, no, it's exactly fair, because if you are peppering your news website and your news bulletins on the radio and television about negative news coming from Reform councils in a vastly disproportionate manner, then you are, of course, going to give viewers and readers the impression that Reform councils are incredibly chaotic relative to the others, when actually the opposite is true. In fact, £1.3 million is the total bill to the taxpayer of all of those Labour and Tory councillors losing the whip. Why? Because they had a shambolic selection process. They had, and look, I was chairman at the time, very proud of the work that we did in fielding more candidates than they did. And again, look, we are not perfect. No one at Reform will ever claim we're perfect. But the BBC must hold itself to higher standards moving forward. And I'm afraid what we are seeing time and time and time again is an incredibly hostile posture towards Reform, and they are simply not accurately reflecting what is happening.
There's nothing more important than keeping your money and your identity safe online. And with so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. But this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GB News viewers. ExpressVPN is offering up to 73% off, plus 4 extra months free. That's top-level security from just £2.49 a month, and you're covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee. So just click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code now. Remember, when you're online, you are often sharing personal data, so hackers can steal your information, your passwords, your photos, and your bank details in just seconds. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your personal information. So why choose ExpressVPN? Well, it couldn't be easier to use. With just one click, you are protected. And ExpressVPN uses military-grade AES 256 encryption, which is the same standard trusted by the US government to guard their classified information. With their new tiered plans, you can protect up to 14 devices at once and manage passwords securely. Live chat support is available 24/7, and it typically connects you in under a minute with a real person. Click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code to get up to 73% off ExpressVPN plus 4 extra months free. Start protecting yourself today with ExpressVPN.
I mean, the data, as you say, is based on the website Open Council data. And of course, it's costing money as well. It's taxpayers' money, not just paying for the BBC licence fee, but cost the taxpayer $625,000 in by-election costs that rose to that's for the Conservatives, 700,000 for Labour.
So 1.3 million is the total number.
So there is money involved in this as well. It's not just the political bias.
Yeah, listen, we're not saying don't report on something negative happening in a Reform Council. What we're saying is make it proportionate, right? And that, by the way, I mean, I'd love to know what Ofcom is saying about it. Have you heard a peep from Ofcom about any of this? We haven't heard anything. Why? Because I'm afraid the establishment, we all know this, the establishment is terrified of Nigel Farage.
Let's talk about the other big political story of the day, if you don't mind, which is obviously Rachel Reeves. She's been doing the political rounds this morning after, some would say, it's probably the most chaotic budget certainly I've ever witnessed in my career on newspapers. What do you make of what she's said today, that she wasn't misleading the public, she was simply just making sure there was enough of a fiscal headroom, enough money to spend?
She lied. She lied. And there's some sort of perceived wisdom in politics. You shouldn't accuse somebody. I'm sorry, a lie is a lie. And she's lied repeatedly. Her whole career, actually, has been built, I'm afraid, on lies. She lied on her CV to get selected and then become an MP. She lied when she claimed, when she talked about how much borrowing and spending she was going to do in order to win the election. Then she lied about whether she was going to raise taxes or not. Now she's raised taxes again. And the evidence that she has lied about this black hole and the country's financial position when she gave that extraordinary speech, which, if you remember, everybody's jaws were on the floor when she gave that speech because no one could understand what was going on. The evidence that she lied is now in the public domain. The IFS basically called her a lie. They didn't quite use the word lie, but it's the strongest worded communication I have seen from the IFS in my lifetime. And I'm afraid I can't see how she's going to get away with this. And if she gets away with this, I'm afraid we are plumbing new depths in British politics.
Well, this is what I was going to come on to as well. I mean, if Rachel Reeves does end up in trouble over this one, surely she has to take her boss, i.e. Keir Starmer, with her. He can't survive if she goes.
Well, the reason why that needs to be true and should be true is because it has now come out that he knew about it. In fact, she said this morning that he did know about it. And listen, you know, the UK gilts market trades tens of billions of pounds every day. It's the most important market in the country. As the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you have preferred and asymmetric access to certain data sets. If you start going and telling the markets, remember, she's not just speaking to the country and voters, she's also speaking to financial markets. Arguably, she was speaking to them more with that speech. A complete lie. I.e., she said the situation has worsened. I mean, we can go through it. She said the opposite of what she had been communicated by the OBR in writing. I'm sorry, that is the dictionary definition of a lie. You could make the argument that it could be termed market abuse in English law. I think it's so unbelievably serious. The only reason we're not maybe making even more of this is because we've been so desensitized to lie after lie after lie. And again, this is probably the most consequential lie she has told as Chancellor.
How are the British public ever going to trust politicians again after this? Not just the Labour Party, but the Conservative Party didn't cover themselves in glory in the past either. How are politicians ever going to get our trust back?
No, I think it needs a sustained period of time from politicians, people standing for office and, actually in elected office, telling the truth, meaning answering the questions. I mean, if you saw her performance, we were just talking before we came on air during the break, her performance this morning, again, was utterly extraordinary. I mean, she was asked, whether it's by Trevor Phillips or Laura Kingsbury, did you lie? And she sort of goes off on some soliloquy about fixing foundations. And then when she's really pressed on it, she says, well, no, of course I didn't. But again, the evidence, this is not conjecture. You know, the correspondence she received from the OBR is in the public domain.
Let's just have a look at what Rachel Reeves had to say this morning.
Well, the Office of Budget Responsibility have published their numbers. I've now delivered the budget. That budget is consistent with the speech that I made at the beginning of November to cut the cost of living, to cut NHS waiting lists and to cut the debt and the deficit. I said in that speech that everyone would need to contribute, but I kept that contribution as low as possible by asking those with the broadest shoulders.
Just for the record, would you welcome an investigation that could draw a line under this, whether you misled the markets and taxpayers or not?
I don't think that is necessary. The Office of Budget Responsibility have published their numbers.
OK, Zia, she doesn't think it's necessary that this is investigated further. You would obviously disagree with that.
Well, I mean, it needs to be investigated further, but one of the reasons I can sit here with a high degree of conviction, the highest possible, to say that she lied, is because the information that condemns her in that regard, again, is in the public domain. And that makes it very different to many other political scandals where there's some sort of circumstantial evidence or, you know, she could argue she didn't know. She was the Chancellor of the Exchequer and claimed that the fiscal situation had worsened when in fact she was in receipt of written correspondence from the OBR that said the opposite, that it had improved. And again, she was therefore falsely disseminated. She was disseminating false information about a market that trades tens of billions of pounds in this country. Many investors would have made investing decisions on that. But let's go back to the voters. To your question, how can we trust anything that Rachel Reeves says ever again? By the way, I don't think many GB News viewers trusted her anyway, but I still think there are people out there. I think she's already the most unpopular Chancellor of all
Since
time.
records began, and the most unpopular Prime Minister as well.
Yeah, so they've already got that set. Yeah. So the question is how much further they can go. We are adamant that not only must she go, but as you said, Starmer needs to resign as well.
Okay, talking of polls and popularity of politicians, Reform has slipped back in the polls. This is a new poll today for the paper, suggesting the party's lead over Labour and the Conservatives is shrinking. Now, while Reform are still ahead of both of those parties, it is true that Nigel Farage's personal popularity has slipped slightly and the party's popularity has slipped. What do you think is going on here?
Well, it was just after the general election, Reform had won 14%. Even that poll you're talking about has Reform at 30%, despite the fact that we only have 5 MPs.
Yeah,
it's been an extraordinary, so it's been an extraordinary run that Reform has been on. Nothing goes up in a straight line. I think there's sort of a period of consolidation here. That particular poll, I think, was something of an outlier. But look, you know, the most important thing, all you can do in politics is keep making the case to the British people. We are by far the most trusted party on immigration. We're now more trusted than the Conservatives and Labour, according to many polls, on the economy as well. We're going to be saying a lot more about cost of living in the coming weeks and months as well. People know what Nigel stands for, right? People know what Nigel stands for. He's been around for decades in a way that they don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. They don't know what Kemi Badenoch stands for, because the Tories, what they're saying now is the total opposite. It's 180 degrees from what they did in office. So what Reform are going to do is keep making our case, and we're confident if we do that, we'll be successful.
Can I just ask you about when you say Nigel Farage, people know what Nigel stands for. Obviously, one of the things that may have affected his personal popularity is these accusations of racism when he was a teenager at school. Do you think that has had any effect on the party's popularity, Nigel's personal popularity? Is it damaging to Reform?
Well, I think if you're going to look at this objectively, if there's wall-to-wall coverage of this on almost every news outlet, every newspaper...
Well, lots of people have come forward, to be fair, Zia, though. Well,
so just to finish that point, if there is, then it would be surprising if there wasn't some impact from that. My response would be this. Everybody watching this programme, to go back to what somebody supposedly said when they were 13 years old, and for that to sort of come out in The Guardian, I think people can make their own... have their own views on that. Nigel has categorically denied it, and as far as I'm concerned, that is the end of the matter. OK. And do you think it has affected the popularity of your party? I think the sheer volume of news coverage about it, I mean, you couldn't escape it, right? It was absolutely everywhere for a sustained period of time. And again, this isn't something he supposedly said last year. It was supposedly what he said when he was 13 years, almost 50 years ago, as a schoolboy. I think it would be surprising if it didn't have some impact. But again, I think what matters most is, look, reform at 30%. Most of the polls that are coming out still would suggest that if a general election were to be held tomorrow, reform would win a majority, perhaps a less significant one than we'd have won a month ago. But here's the thing. The general election is still years away. We take nothing for granted. We've said this consistently. We're incredibly proud of what we've achieved in the last 12, 18 months. We've got a lot more work to do. We'll keep making our case to the British people.
See, Yusuf, thank you very much for coming in and joining us today. OK, now, well, Reform Head of UK, you've heard what he has to say. We've got lots more opinion coming up in the next hour, and also we want your opinion on that as well. Now, in regards to the BBC story, GB News has reached out to the BBC for comment, but we are yet to hear a response. However, previously, a BBC spokesperson has said the BBC reports without fear or favour and holds power and those who seek power to account. Anyone watching, reading or listening to our coverage can be in no doubt that we report, scrutinise and provide analysis on the current government and other political parties across a significant range of topics. The methodology of this analysis is unclear, but you can't measure impartiality by counting articles on one particular subject. OK, thank you very much, Zia, for coming in. Good to see you.